Hi, it's Family Read Aloud time. We are on, it's Wednesday. We are on day 8 of our story. We are reading Here in the Real World by Sarah Pennypacker. We're getting to know more about Ware and Jolene and what's going on. The abandoned church lot, and we're going to see what happens next. We are picking up with chapter 41. When we left off, Jolene suddenly decided they were going to go, she and Ware were going to go on an adventure to his grandmother's rehab place where she's healing from her broken hips, from her hip replacement, not broken, but so now she wants to go there. So that's their plan. So, chapter 41. What? What's so interesting about a candy bar wrapper? Jolene flattened the wrapper on the bench as carefully as if it were a treasure map. Ware pulled his cap down. He'd been nervous every minute since Jolene's decision, worrying about everything that could go wrong. As long as Jolene and Big Deal never met, he reassured himself for the 100th time things would probably be fine. He risked a glance back at the community center. At noontime, Miss Sanchez should be busy trying to keep milk carton missiles from launching, but you never know. Beside him, Jolene bent over the wrapper. There was a cat that lived next door once, he said. He used to stare at the wall for hours. We think he must have been hit on the head when he was a kitten. Number 5 in the knight's code was, "Thou shalt never give wanton offense." Ware knew he was giving wanton offense right now, but he couldn't help it. Jolene placed a finger on the wrapper. She raised her head. Her sunglasses looked like discs of ice. Maybe he was a genius cat. Maybe he figured out that if he stared at the wall long enough, you'd quit bothering him. Let him be a cat instead of wanting him to be something else. Ware checked his watch. Still 2 minutes before the bus. I wouldn't do that. I don't do that. Yes, you do. You want a wrecked church to be a castle. You want a bunch of busted cookie sheets to be a suit of armor. I saw that screen. You want some broken glass to be a jewelry window. You want the world to be fair when it's not. Ware couldn't argue the last point. He did want the world to be fair. It wasn't fair that more people didn't want the world to be fair. You think my window looks jewelry? Jolene smoothed the wrapper, bent even closer. Seriously, what are you doing? She sputtered up her bangs. I'm trying to know where this has been before. Like, did the paper come from an apple tree way up north? This blue color, did it come from turquoise out west? Everything was something else before. Sometimes, if you look hard enough, you can see it. The whole story of a thing. The bus fumed up then. Jolene dropped the wrapper in the trash. Ware followed her onto the bus, thinking. He watched the buildings roll by, each built of things that used to be something else. Jolene, if everything was something else before, then everything will be something else afterward. Of course, recycling. Even people. Especially people. Chapter 42. Everything was something else before and will be something else after. The concept had expanded so explosively in his brain on the bus ride that Ware forgot to worry about bringing Jolene to the rehab place. As soon as he walked into the bright lobby of the New Horizons Rehabilitation Center, though, he remembered. He aimed a warning look over his shoulder. Jolene raised clasped hands to her chin and fluttered her lids innocently, which was the opposite of reassuring. We're here to visit my grandmother, he told the woman behind the registration desk who was eating an egg salad sandwich. The woman paused with her sandwich in midair. She wore a pale blue scarf splotched with yellow stains, as if she ate egg salad sandwiches a lot. Her eyes were squinty chips behind crinkly black lashes. It looked as if she was peering at him through a nest of spiders. My grandmother, we're here to visit her, Ware repeated. Then he gave her Big Deal's name. Spiders made him nervous. The woman put down her sandwich. Isn't that the nicest thing? Somehow she made it sound as if what she really meant was, now here's a big pain in the neck just when I'm trying to have my lunch. She pushed a clipboard across the desk. Sign in here. Ware filled in their names, then turned. Jolene was halfway through the lobby. Ware dropped the pen and caught up with her. No fooling around. You're just here to get that information you want. Now we should meet back in the lobby by... Trash can! Jolene pointed down a side hall, and she was off. Chapter 43. Ware stood in the doorway, overwhelmed by how much he'd missed his grandmother. The beds in the room had metal rails like giant cribs. Lying in hers, Big Deal looked too small, like a wrinkled baby. Her hair, which until this moment he had not suspected was a wig, hung off a lamp on the bedside table. Her scalp was covered with soft gray fuzz, as if the wrinkled baby were dusty. As she whuffled a small snore, the skin on her neck trembled. The tremble hurt something in his chest. He hadn't constituted himself the defender of his grandmother's weakness when it counted, but he could do it now. He tiptoed in and eased the sheet up to her chin. Big Deal startled awake. Oh, Ware! What a nice surprise! She looked toward the door. I came by myself. Mom's working a million hours. She is. They both are. Poor them. Big Deal plucked her wig off the lamp and tugged it on. She looked like herself instantly. The magic of hair. I'm sorry I left you alone that night, Big Deal, he plunged in. I should have known you might fall. I should have... Big Deal waved it off. That's ridiculous. How could you have known? How could he have known? That was the question, all right. I wish I had, though. Maybe you wouldn't be here now. Is it terrible here, Big Deal? Oh, no, it's all right here. Big Deal craned her head toward the door. Although a person would think she could get a little bacon now and then, she added, loud enough that a passing orderly chuckled. Ware dropped into the red plastic chair beside the bed. He tipped his head to the other crib. Where's your roommate? Dialysis. He pointed to what looked like a television screen behind his grandmother, glowing with squiggly lines. What's that? That? Oh, that's proof. Proof? That I'm alive. I got a little dizzy this morning, so they hooked me up. This is the kind of place... She leaned to the door again and cupped a hand around her mouth. The kind of place where you can't get any bacon. Where you need to prove you're alive. Hand me my bag, would you, Ware? Ware passed her the purse. She dug around until she found a lipstick. While she was applying it, he thought about the kind of place that would require a person to prove she was alive. Not a good one. Were you scared? You mean about this? She patted her sides. Ware nodded. I suppose a bit, but then your mother came. It helps a lot not to be alone. Also, Mrs. Sauer, she barely left my side. She visits me twice a week, too. That's something, a 2-hour drive each way. Ware scowled and quickly rearranged his face. I saw that look. What do you have against Rita? Ware twitched. She has something against me. Big Deal waved a hand. Oh, she's a little vinegary is all. Ware knew he should drop it. He was here to make his grandmother feel better, not get her stirred up. But number 8 in the knight's code was, Thou shalt do battle against unfairness whenever faced with it. And he was faced with it now. What about those twin girls visiting next door? Mrs. Sauer made them a cake. I saw her bring it over, so she's nice to girls. Big Deal patted the sheet until she found the bed remote. She pressed a button and rose majestically until she was looking right in Ware's face. Those girls were quiet. Barely came outside except to make a puzzle on the patio the one time. Who knows, maybe Rita likes quiet and out of sight is all. Ware tapped his fingers on the chair arm. He really should let it go, but he couldn't. No, I think she doesn't like me. Suddenly he remembered who it was who'd said off in his own world about him in that blaming way. Mrs. Sauer, when he'd climbed out of the pool. She acted as if I'd done something wrong, Big Deal. If you think that, you should ask her next time you see her. Now, speaking of girls who are quiet and out of sight, who is your friend? Ware felt himself redden. My friend? The one who's been skulking around the halls the whole time you've been here, peeking in? Overalls, blonde, could use a meal. Ware got up and leaned into the hall. There was no sign of Jolene. You saw her? See those mirrors up high? He looked up. He nodded. They're so the orderlies can see the gurneys coming around the corner, avoid crack-ups. I may have accidentally adjusted a couple with my cane. I see everything that happens on this floor. Oh, well, she did come with me, but she's not my friend, and she's sure not quiet. No? Big Deal seemed to grow larger, as if she weren't going to fit in that crib much longer. Well, go call her in, the little skulker. Let's hear what she has to say for herself. Ware sighed, but he got up. There was no talking Big Deal out of something once she'd decided. He found Jolene hanging out of a dumpster in back of the building. He tugged her overalls and she slid to the ground. She held her arm up to display a sling as if it were a diamond bracelet. Just throw it away. People. My grandmother sent me to get you. I can say you left. She wants to see me? Jolene pulled off the sling and stuffed it into her pocket. She's kind of direct, Ware warned. She wants to know everything. Me too, Jolene said. Maybe I'll finally get some answers. Chapter 44. Jolene was a whole lot more polite than Ware had guessed she could be. Pleased to meet you. Hot one out there today. What'd you do with your old hip? Ma'am, please, she said after the introductions. Big Deal tugged her wig around as if it was suddenly too tight. Well, I had those hips for 71 years. I don't know why I didn't think to ask where they were taking them. That's all right, ma'am, Jolene said, all soothing comfort. But can you ask now? Thank you, please. Big Deal shook her head with what looked like genuine regret. The surgery was in a hospital back home. I'm only recuperating here. Now, tell me why you want to know. She raised her eyebrows at Jolene. Uh-oh, Ware muttered. Big Deal shot him a look that reminded him he used to be afraid of her. She smiled encouragingly at Jolene. Unbelievable! His own grandmother taking the side of a stranger she'd known for a single minute. Jolene sat up primly. Things get used up or broken, or they're too hard to take care of. Ooh, excuse me. But that doesn't mean they're trash. I like to know if something gets thrown away, it's done right. Respectful like. Ma'am? Big Deal nodded. Very admirable. Jolene raised her chin toward the empty bed. How about, excuse me, your roommate? You know where her kidney went? Sorry, the subject hasn't arisen, but I'll tell you what. There's a fellow here knows things. Name of Franklin, goes around delivering meals and rustling up blankets. Used to work in a big hospital over in Tampa. Go find Franklin. You'll find answers. Jolene mumbled a string of thank you ma'ams and bolted. She's obsessed with how stuff gets thrown away, Ware said apologetically when she was gone. It's like she thinks trash has feelings. Big Deal perked up. Why is that? Ware shrugged. You haven't asked? Ha, was all he could manage at that terrible idea. Big Deal cocked her head. Girlfriend trouble? Oh, she's not She lives behind the community center. I only help her with her gardening, that's all. He got up and looked out the window. This line of questioning could bring him dangerously close to the subject of where he spent his days. That's a nice tree down there. Have you seen that tree? What's her family like? She lives with her aunt. I'll bet a lot of birds land in that tree. Did you know that a sandhill crane weighs 10 pounds and it lands feet first? An aunt? What about her parents? I don't know. All I know about it is that her aunt doesn't want her there. Big Deal sat up. That's terrible. That's a crime. Why doesn't she? Ware spread his hands. Ware, there is a considerable lot you don't know about a person who came all the way here with you. It's just, Jolene, if she wanted to tell me something, she'd tell me. That sounds like an assumption, Ware. Don't make assumptions about people. Maybe she can't guess that you're interested. Never wrong to ask. Ware pondered the idea. Maybe he'd try. Probably not. He pulled the chair out, but Big Deal waved him away. You go catch up with her. I'm tired, but come visit again and bring her with you. Big Deal lowered the bed and nestled her head into the pillow. The proof machine beeped in a reassuring manner. She closed her eyes and smiled. Little skulker. Ware could still hear her chuckling as the elevator door closed. Chapter 45. Ware checked the water weeds every morning for a week. The new plants didn't seem upset they'd been kidnapped, but they didn't seem thrilled about it either. He filmed them each day, and each day they looked the same, wet and green. The new wall grew taller around them, like an anxious crowd rising on their toes to see better. When it was finished, Ware stalled. 3 feet is a lot of water, a lot of pressure, he said. We need a backup wall around this deep part just in case. They built the second wall inside the first, leaving a gap that they filled with garbage-bagged gravel. And each day that week, too, Ware checked the water weeds. Still wet and green. Ware thought about the proof machine in his grandmother's room. He would like to have one above those water weeds. Then finally, he noticed something different. He scrolled back to the first day he'd filmed them to be sure. Then he ran to get Jolene. See here on the fringes, he asked, how the green is lighter? Jolene dropped to her knees and raised her sunglasses to inspect them closer. Yep, they're growing again. They're growing again, he crowed, 2 fists in the air. We did it! Life! Jolene blew her bangs out and rolled her eyes. It's not like you invented growing, she scoffed. But she was fighting a smile. He gave a sprig of waterweed a gentle tug, and the little plant held firm. I'm not going anywhere, it seemed to say. I like it right here. It's time, he declared. Let's fill the moat. Chapter 46. You never asked? All this time you never asked? It's water. Water's free. Ware folded his arms and narrowed his eyes. Okay, fine, Jolene said. We'll go ask Walter. Ware looked up at the grotto bar sign. The flamingo's beak suddenly looked extremely sharp. Excuse me. We? Now Jolene folded her arms and narrowed her eyes. Okay, we. Ware followed Jolene over the fence and across the parking lot. Jolene pulled open the back door and marched in, but Ware stopped to prepare himself. He was walking into a bar, an actual bar. He wanted to etch every detail into his memory. The bar was cool and dark. While his eyes adjusted, he drew in the smells. Beer and something that smelled like it used to be beer. And then the sounds. Whirring fans, clacking billiard balls, a song that seemed to consist entirely of the words, "Without you." The bar itself was an L-shaped island of wood. A mirror behind it reflected hundreds of bottles. And two kids. Jolene looked like herself, but Ware was embarrassed to see that he could have been auditioning for a roller coaster commercial. He closed his mouth and blinked his eyeballs back into their sockets. A bear-sized man behind the bar was filling a mug from a tap built into the mirror. His head was shaved and a rainbow tattoo encircled his neck like a halo that had slipped. He glanced up in the mirror and winked at Jolene. Hey, Sprout, he said over his shoulder. You and your friend pull up a stool. I'll be right there. Just in time, Ware saw that this was a joke since the stools were bolted to the floor. He chuckled in what he hoped was a manly way. Jolene shot him a puzzled look. She climbed onto a stool and he took the one beside her. The bartender came up and leaned in. His hands, splayed on the bar, were the size of baseball mitts. The usual, he asked. When Jolene nodded, he grabbed two mugs and shot something pale and sparkling into them from a spigot. He arranged a couple of orange slices on the rims and set the mugs down on coasters that said hilariously, "Bottoms up." Walter, can we have some water? Jolene asked. Walter tipped his head to Ware. Who's we? This is Ware. I told you about him. Good to meet you, Ware, Walter said. He picked up two more mugs and made for the sink. No, I mean outside, Jolene stopped him. Can we have some water from your hose? Of course, Sprout. It's hot out there. Take as much as you want. You don't have to ask. Jolene shot Ware a look of triumph, and Ware picked up his mug. His first drink in a bar. Ginger ale. It tasted completely different, way better than any ginger ale he'd ever had. Possibly it was champagne. When Jolene bent to her drink, Walter stretched and peered at the booths along the far wall. Ware thought he looked a little worried, but then Walter leaned in toward Jolene with a smile. Got some more cans for you out in the stockroom. While you're out there, flatten the boxes for me. Take them out to recycling, okay? Jolene grabbed her mug and pushed through a set of swinging doors. A bald man at the far end of the bar raised a hand. Hey, Walter, fill her up, he called. While Walter was gone, Ware swiveled to check out the customers. 4 men playing pool, 2 guys in green uniforms hunkered over beer mugs a few stools away. 2 older women perched at a high-top table playing cards. Counting the bald man, 9 people. Just then, another woman's head rose over the back of a booth. Her hair sprung out in a crown, the yellowest Ware had ever seen, but black at the center. She took a sip from a green bottle, swept a slow gaze around the place, and then plopped back down as if what she'd seen had exhausted her. So, there were 10 of them, a dozen counting himself and Jolene. It had looked like more because of all the mirrors. People in bars must really like to look at themselves, Ware concluded, because besides the giant mirror behind the bar, the walls were covered with them, all advertising beers in ornate golden letters. Some of the mirrors were also clocks. Ware was surprised that people would want to look at themselves with time sweeping over their faces, but there were many mysteries about bars he had yet to unravel. He twirled his stool back to the bar and noticed what he'd missed before. Blue plastic bowls were spaced every couple of feet. Chip nuts, at last. He reached for the closest bowl, but just then Walter came back. Sorry, my client had a sensitive issue that needed my ears. Walter tugged his ear. Professional listener. Mostly, that's my job, and of course, every so often, offer a refreshing beverage. Ware pointed to the bowl down the line. And chip nuts. He secretly pinched the side of his thigh. He was in an actual bar having a conversation with an actual bartender. Walter snapped his fingers. Yes, never underestimate the value of having something to crunch when you're trying to clarify a problem. Walter picked up a white towel and began to polish the wood in slow, perfect circles. Say you come in. I get you something to drink. Then I ask, how you doing, pal? You take a sip. Then you say, doing okay, Walter. Thanks, but I got this problem. Now, do you have a problem, Ware? Ware nodded vigorously. He had several, in fact. His mother, Jolene, Mrs. Sauer. Okay, so here's where the chip nuts come in. He slid a blue bowl over to Ware. Take a handful and shake them into your mouth. Crunch for a while and think about the problem. Ware shook a handful into his mouth, and just as Jolene had claimed, they did taste like bacon and french fries and peanuts all at the same time. They were the most delicious thing he had ever eaten. He crunched them thoughtfully. And Walter was right, it did help him clarify his problem. People have a lot of expectations about me. My mother expects me to be like her. She hates spending time alone, so she thinks it's bad for me, too, he began. But I'm not her. Ooh, boy, tell me about it. Walter nodded in a manner that somehow expressed sympathy over all the injustices in the world. Ware munched another handful of chip nuts and was just about to venture into the subject of the vow he'd made to Jolene when she pushed through the swinging doors. She peered around an armload of cans and nodded toward the exit. Ware drained his soda, then drew out his wallet. Walter waved it away. On the house, pal. Thanks, Walter, Ware said in a new, deeper voice, and slipped off the stool. Ware unscrewed the hose nozzle. For a moment, he and Jolene stared down at the water, running into the vast, empty moat. Maybe it's not turned all the way on? He asked hopefully. Jolene shook her head. Full force. He followed Jolene's gaze as she lifted it from the hose to her papayas and then to the front fencing where the auction notice was. He could read her feelings as if they were printed on his own heart. Everything takes too long, she said, except the things that don't take long enough. Ooh, boy, Ware said. Tell me about it. That's where we're going to leave off for today. Pick up with chapter 47 tomorrow. Have a good night. Bye.